on tonight's headlines. Tonight, deadly Hurricane Ian, one of the most powerful storms ever to hit the U.S., roared into South Carolina, delivering a powerful second punch after walloping Florida. A 5.9 magnitude earthquake hit Indonesia's Sumatra Island early today, according to the USGS, killing at least one and injuring dozens as locals rushed out of buildings seeking safety. And Russian President Vladimir Putin annexed 4 parts of Ukraine occupied by his army, staging a grand ceremony in Moscow as Kiev vowed to battle on and pushed for expedited NATO membership. And later, Elon Musk showed off the latest version of a humanoid robot that the world's richest man said could one day eliminate poverty. Tonight, deadly Hurricane Ian, one of the most powerful storms ever to hit the United States, roared into South Carolina, delivering a powerful second punch after walloping Florida. Heavy rains and winds crossed into North Carolina on Friday evening. Governor Roy Cooper warned residents to be vigilant.
Listen to your local officials and be aware of potential flooding. Stay indoors and off the roads if you possibly can. And if you have to go out, do not drive through water. It only takes a few inches to sweep a car away. We're seeing significant rainfall. As much as 8 inches is expected in some places, along with strong winds. We're seeing storm surge flooding along our coast, and flash floods are possible across the state. And we may see some isolated tornadoes as well. And the state of emergency that I declared on Wednesday remains in effect.
The National Hurricane Center said Ian made landfall near Georgetown, South Carolina as a Category 1 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 140 kilometers per hour. It was later downgraded to a post-tropical cyclone, but the National Hurricane Center said Friday evening that Ian is bringing heavy rains, flash flooding, and high winds to both South Carolina and North Carolina. Nearly 500,000 customers were without power, according to tracking website poweroutage.us, as a weekend Ian nevertheless lashed the states. We now go to Florida, where it has already felt Hurricane Ian's wrath and is still scrambling to save lives. Melissa Podes reports from Orlando, Florida.
More than 24 hours after Hurricane Ian pummeled through Central Florida as a tropical storm, communities continue to deal with the aftermath.
I knew it was going to be bad, but I didn't know I was going to lose everything. We're trying to salvage what we can.
This is H&S Marina. We took the leap of faith to move down here in January from Wisconsin, and it was beautiful all the way up to, a few days ago. And we never, obviously, were in a hurricane. And our home is okay, and our family here, my son and my husband and everyone's okay here. We just lost everything in our business.
According to Orlando City Mayor Buddy Dyer, Orlando experienced historic flooding with many areas reaching 14 inches above normal levels.
And we are still feeling the impacts. The city has received historic flooding in excess of 14 inches of water, and unfortunately the only way the flooding is going to go down is to recede naturally. If you can stay home, do it. Stay there. If your home is flooded and you can safely self-evacuate to a shelter, please do that. But I can't stress enough how important it is to shelter in place. The storm and its impacts are going to continue to be with us.
Orlando Fire and Police Departments continue to assess flooding and have been completing residential rescues as needed. Orange County Public School officials began assessing OCPS schools and facilities for damage, with the goal of reopening all schools on Monday, October 3rd. In Osceola County, residents are encouraged to continue to shelter in place and to avoid venturing out on roadways unless necessary. Because of extreme flooding in low-lying and flood-prone areas, the city of Kissimmee has issued a mandatory curfew from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. until further notice. At this time, more than 1.8 million customers across the state remain without power. Orlando International Airport has resumed flight operations. However, passengers are encouraged to contact their specific airline before coming to the airport. While communities continue to clean up debris and damage from Hurricane Ian, President Biden approved Governor Ron DeSantis' request to grant a major disaster declaration for all 67 counties.
This allows for immediate federal funding for the state to shelter people and provide other essential support. By approving it early, ahead of the storm's landfall in South Carolina, we can get some. And as you all know, the situation in Florida is far more devastating. We're just beginning to see the scale of that destruction. It's likely to rank among the worst of the nation's and the worst in the nation's history. You have all seen seen on television, homes and property wiped out. It's going to take months, years to rebuild. And our hearts go out to all those folks whose lives have been absolutely devastated by this storm. So Americans, just imagine yourself in that situation. Water rising, walls collapsing, streets turned literally into rivers, charter boats on top of automobiles, watching the home and the community work so hard to establish, literally washed away.
Melissa Potes, Orlando, Florida, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
Meanwhile, Filipinos along the path of Hurricane Ian were advised by the Philippine Embassy in Washington to take the necessary precautions. In a statement, the embassy urged those concerned to monitor the movements of the storm and to take all necessary preparations. They were also urged to heed the warnings of local officials. According to the embassy, the hurricane is expected to move further inland across eastern South Carolina and central North Carolina over the weekend. And according to media reports, meanwhile, Hurricane Ian made landfall over South Carolina Friday, U.S. time. Now, this was after the hurricane, then classified as a Category 4, wreaked havoc in Florida. Meanwhile, DFA spokesperson Maria Teresita Daza announced that no casualty was reported among the 168,000 Filipinos in Florida. The DFA said Filipinos are safe despite the havoc brought by Hurricane Ian. In tonight's other news, a 5.9 magnitude earthquake hit Indonesia's Sumatra Island early today, according to the USGS, killing at least one person, injuring dozens as locals rushed out of buildings seeking safety. The quake hit at a relatively shallow depth of 13 kilometers just before 2:30 a.m. local time, about 40 kilometers from the town of Sibolga in North Sumatra province, according to the USGS. A regional disaster mitigation agency official said a man in his 50s died from a heart attack triggered by the quake, and at least 25 other people were injured. Authorities are still gathering reports on damage, but electricity poles and telecommunication towers have been hit, knocking out services. More than 50 aftershocks were already recorded by the Indonesian Meteorology and Geophysics Agency. Officials advised residents to watch for further tremors and urged people to seek shelter on safe ground. In tonight's other news, Russian President Vladimir Putin annexed 4 parts of Ukraine occupied by his army, staging a grand ceremony in Moscow as Kiev vowed to battle on and pushed for expedited NATO membership. It's one of the biggest attempts of land grab in Europe since the Second World War. Let's listen in.
Право выбора. Люди пришли на референдум и сделали этот выбор. Быть со своей исторической родиной, с Россией. Россия не только открывает двери родного дома для наших братьев и сестер, она открывает им свое сердце. Добро пожаловать домой. Мы стали сильнее, потому что мы вместе. За нами правда, а в правде сила, а значит победа. Победа будет за нами!
Мне важно быть здесь сейчас, потому что я не
недавно только вернулась с Донбасса. Я общалась там с людьми напрямую. Мы работали как волонтеры, там раздавали гумнаборы, просто говорили с детьми, с стариками. И везде мы видели наших людей. И поэтому я рада, что этот день настал, потому что...
Я хотела, чтобы на этой площади мы собрались, когда будем праздновать победу, нашу общую победу украинского народа и русского, потому что мы всегда были вместе. И поэтому то, что происходит сейчас, это очень больно все это воспринимать, потому что у меня папа с Украины.
President Putin, rarely seen making physical contact since the pandemic, joined hands with his proxy leaders and they shouted along in unison on state TV. In central Moscow, at least 10,000 people convened for state-organized annexation celebrations. The four territories create a crucial land corridor between Russia and the Crimean Peninsula, annexed also by Moscow in 2014. Together, all five regions, including Crimea, make up around 20% of Ukraine, whose forces in recent weeks have been clawing back territory. Now, the UN chief said it will have no legal standing, but it will be a dangerous escalation of the war. U.S. President Joe Biden, meanwhile, has joined other world leaders in Moscow's attempt to redraw international borders. Again, let's listen in.
I want to also speak to Mr. Putin's remarks this morning. You know, America and its allies are not going, let me emphasize, are not going to be intimidated, are not going to be intimidated by Putin and his reckless words and threats. He's not going to scare us, and he doesn't, or intimidate us. Putin's actions are a sign he's struggling. The sham referenda he carried out, the sham routine that he put on this morning, that's showing the unity and, you know, as people holding hands together. Well, the United States is never going to recognize this. And quite frankly, the world's not going to recognize it either. He can't seize his neighbor's territory and get away with it. It's as simple as that. And we're fully prepared to defend. I want to say this again. America is fully prepared with our NATO allies to defend every single inch of NATO territory. Every single inch. So, Mr. Putin, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Every inch.
Хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения, а по отдельным компонентам и более современными, чем у стран НАТО. И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф. Граждане России могут быть уверены, территориальная целостность нашей Родины, наша независимость и свобода будут обеспечены. Подчеркну это еще раз. Всеми имеющимися у нас средствами. А те, кто пытаются шантажировать нас ядерным оружием, должны знать, что роза ветров может развернуться и в их.
It is a risk, given all of the loose talk and the nuclear saber rattling by Putin, that he would consider this. And we've been equally clear about what the consequences would be. We have communicated that directly to the Russians. We do not presently see indications about the imminent use of nuclear weapons. We feel that we have in place right now the capacity to effectively deter and respond to any contingency and to make good on what President Biden emphatically reinforced today, that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Zelensky doubled down in an address to the nation, vowing never to hold talks with Russia as long as Putin was in power. Hours ahead of the annexation ceremony, an attack in Zaporizhia in the south killed at least 30 people and wounded dozens as civilians were preparing to leave to pick up relatives, according to Ukrainian officials. Bodies in civilian clothes were strewn across the ground after the attack, and windows of cars cars blown out. The deadly attack came in the morning when hundreds of people were waiting in a line of vehicles to cross into the Russian-controlled lead part of the region. Drivers and passengers were waiting outside a logistics center for permission to cross, which can take days or even weeks. A woman who survived and asked to use the pseudonym Katya said some 300 cars were waiting around 8 a.m. when the rockets hit. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced that a nuclear war will have severe consequences for Russia. This during a press conference following Russian President Vladimir Putin signing an annexation accord with the Kremlin-installed leaders of 4 occupied Ukrainian regions. Take a look.
President Putin's nuclear rhetoric is dangerous. It is reckless. NATO is, of course, vigilant. We monitor closely what Russia does. Russia must understand that the nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. And it will have severe consequences for Russia if they use nuclear weapons. And this has been very clearly conveyed to Russia.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky not backing down and formally submits Ukraine's NATO application. He said, "We are taking a decisive step by signing Ukraine's application for accelerated accession to NATO, a Kremlin red line. Though for now, it's highly unlikely NATO would approve of Ukraine joining the alliance." And NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg, meanwhile, remained non-committal after Ukraine said it was applying to join the Western Alliance. Let's listen in.
And a decision on membership, of course, has to be taken by all 30 allies, and we take these decisions by consensus. Our focus now is on providing immediate support to Ukraine to help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian brutal invasion.
Before Russia invaded Ukraine in February, Moscow requested binding guarantees from Kyiv not to join the U.S.-led security alliance and used this as a pretext for launching the invasion. If Ukraine's application is successful and it officially joins the alliance, member states would be obligated to defend it against Russia. Now, this means that both the UK and the U.S. would be obliged to send military troops. As Ukraine isn't a member, NATO isn't obliged to come to its defense. NATO countries fear that if their troops confront Russian forces, it could lead to an all-out conflict between Russia and the West. And the chances of today's global food access crisis becoming one of food availability tomorrow remains a real threat without urgent action from the world's wealthiest nations. That, according to the Food and Agriculture Agency, FAO Chief Kyu Dong-yu made the appeal to agriculture ministers from the world's 20 strongest economies who are meeting under the G20 banner in Bali. Take a look.
Conflict, slowdown and a downturn because of COVID-19 and the climate crisis are the major drivers and our crisis today and tomorrow. So without peace, we will not achieve the zero hunger and the sustainable development goals. Food prices were very high for consumers and input prices are very high for farmers. Much needs to be done to ensure that all people can afford safe, nutritious food in sufficient quantity to meet their daily needs and preference and have a healthy life. We must increase the resilience of the global agri-food systems. It is paramount to increase the innovation, identify the alternatives, invest in infrastructure.
Mr. Coup said that the UN-backed Black Sea Grain Initiative had provided an important step forward in promoting exports from Russia and Ukraine despite the war. But the agreement needs to be complemented to improve the food access of most vulnerable countries, pointing to his agency's food import financing facility proposal, which is now being coordinated by the International Monetary Fund. The idea of the financing facility is to provide funds to 62 lower-income food importing countries that are home to almost 1.8 billion people to meet their most urgent needs. A nuclear test by North Korea would be a game changer in the region and provoke a U.S. response spanning multiple instruments of national power, according to officials with the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command in Honolulu. Take a look. While acknowledging that a link had not been established between the recent launches and a possible nuclear test, the head of the American fleet in the region, Admiral Sam Papero, said any such test would be a matter of grave concern and would prompt a broad U.S. response. And that response would be first in close consultation with the treaty ally, South Korea, and would likely be in accordance with the doctrine of integrated deterrence. It would span multiple instruments of national power, he said, alluding to diplomatic, military, and economic measures. Meanwhile, General Kenneth Wilsback, commander of the U.S. Air Force in the Pacific, said North Korea's possession of such a weapon was especially unsettling because, unlike other powers, Pyongyang did not consider nuclear arms to be strictly deterrents, kept but never used. They've threatened to use those weapons against their neighbors and possibly even the U.S. He said, I mean, if you think about other countries who have those weapons, they don't talk like that, and so that should have everyone concerned. North Korea, which has carried out 4 ballistic missiles launches this week, appears to be preparing for a nuclear test that would likely take place 1 to 2 weeks after the Chinese Communist Party Congress starting October 16, according to an official who requested anonymity. The official's analysis echoes that of the South Korean intelligence services, who believe a test is likely between October 16 and the U.S. midterm elections on November 7. In other news, Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha resumed office after the country's constitutional court ruled that he hasn't exceeded his 8-year term limit. Take a look.
อาศัยเหตุผลดังกล่าวข้างต้นศาลรัฐธรรมนูญโดยมติเสียงข้างมากจึงวินิจฉัยว่าความเป็นรัฐมนตรีของนายกรัฐมนตรีผู้ถูกร้องไม่สิ้นสุดลงตามรัฐธรรมนูญแห่งราชอาณาจักรไทยพุทธศักราช 2560 ตามมาตรา 1
The former army chief who came to power in a 2014 military coup was suspended last month while the court examined a legal challenge mounted by opposition parties who argued he had reached his term limit in power. Under the 2017 Thai constitution, a prime minister cannot serve more than 8 years in office. But Prayut's supporters and critics disagreed about when his term began. The ruling counts Prayut's term from when the new army scripted constitution came into force and means he can stay in office until 2025, depending on an upcoming national poll, which must be held within months. Prayut welcomed the 6-3 majority ruling in a statement on his official Facebook page, saying he would use the government's remaining time in office to push ahead with infrastructure projects. Bangkok authorities were on alert for demonstrations after the ruling, as several protest groups had earlier said they would take to the streets if Prayut won the case. In other news, Nicaragua said that the new U.S. ambassador would not be granted entry due to his interfering attitude, as firebrand President Daniel Ortega warned he may consider severing ties with the Netherlands. Earlier in the day, Nicaraguan President and former revolutionary Daniel Ortega had lashed out at the European nation after learning it wouldn't fund a long-promised hospital. Take a look.
Y el que viene aquí a faltarle el respeto a nuestro pueblo, a nuestra patria, pues que no vuelva a aparecer por Nicaragua. Y no queremos relaciones con ese gobierno intervencionista.
According to the president, during a visit to the capital, Managua, Piren informed Nicaragua's Foreign Minister Dennis Moncada that the Dutch would no longer be financing a hospital they promised to build years ago. The Netherlands closed its offices in Managua in 2013 and conducts all its Central American diplomatic work from Costa Rica. Before Ortega's remarks, his wife, Nicaraguan Vice President Rosario Murillo, said that new U.S. envoy Hugo Rodriguez will not, under any circumstances, be admitted into our Nicaragua. Nicaragua said it decided to withdraw its approval of Rodriguez because of disrespectful comments he made in a hearing before the Senate. Rodriguez had described Nicaragua as a pariah state in the region and branded Ortega's government a dictatorship. On Wednesday, the government asked the European Union Ambassador Bettina Moischai to leave the country without giving any reasons. In other news tonight, NASA said it would try to launch its MoonMega rocket in November without committing to a precise date for the much-delayed Optimus 1 mission. The U.S. Space Agency, which was forced to postpone its latest liftoff attempt due to massive Hurricane Ian, which hammered Florida this week, announced it was preparing its next launch window for between November 12 and the 27th. Officials had so far refused to completely shut the door on an earlier attempt in October. The SLS rocket, the most powerful ever designed by NASA, had to be returned to its storage hangar at Kennedy Space Center on Tuesday in order to shelter it from the approach of Hurricane Ian. The storm devastated parts of Florida, but the rocket itself suffered no damage. And military officers announced the removal from office of Burkina Faso's junta leader on Friday, the dismissal of Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, who himself came to power in a coup last January, was announced in a statement read out on national television. The rebelling military also announced the closure of borders from midnight, as well as the suspension of the constitution and the dissolution of the government. They declared the country's new strongman as Captain Ibrahim Traore. Around 15 soldiers in fatigues appeared on the radio television broadcaster shortly before 8 p.m. local time and read out the statement. The Economic Community of West African States Regional Bloc condemned in the strongest possible terms the latest seizure of power, calling it inappropriate at a time when progress was being made for a return to constitutional order by July 1, 2024. Burkina Faso's former colonial ruler France told its citizens in Ouagadougou, believed to number between 4,000 and 5,000, to stay home while the EU expressed concern at the unfolding events. The U.S., meanwhile, called for a return to calm and restraint by all actors. And the news continues. Zero on Eagle News. We'll be back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
The peso continued to improve against the U.S. dollar on Friday, but risk-off sentiments reigned in the local bourse due to renewed recession fears. As the U.S. dollar's 20-year high waned a tad, the local currency continued to regain its footing and finished the week at 58.625 from the previous day's 58.97. Its strength showed early on when it opened the trade at 58.6 from 58.87 on Thursday. It traded between 58.53 and 58.79, resulting in an average of 58.646. In other business news, luxury sports car maker Porsche raced onto the Frankfurt Stock Exchange with one of Europe's biggest listings in years, leveraging its brand power to defy global market turmoil. Its share rose to over 84.70 euros in morning trading, bettering the 82.50 euros price set by its parent company, Volkswagen, and outperforming a weak Frankfurt market. Even as markets worldwide suffer from surging inflation and mounting recession fears, the maker of the 911 sports car has pushed ahead with a bold flotation that gives Porsche a valuation of more than 76 billion euros. An Austrian-born engineer, Ferdinand Porsche, was founder of the luxury car brand that bears his name. In addition, he created the Volkswagen Beetle and designed the iconic open-top Mercedes-Benz SSK sports car. During World War II, he contributed to the German war effort by helping produce weapon systems and was a member of the Nazi Party. He died in 1951. As a monster truck crashes cars into the crowd's delight as part of a free Detroit Auto Show event, visitors are flocking to take pictures of Bigfoot 20, the world's first electric monster truck. Take a look.
This runs on pure methanol. It runs probably about 1,400 horsepower. There's only one electric monster truck in the world. It's here with us in Detroit, here at the North America. I don't know that it necessarily has the promise to become its own class. I think right now it's just very new for the industry and new for, obviously the technology based around the vehicle is all new, but eventually you might see a couple electric monster trucks.
The Ford-built model, which weighs around 11,000 pounds, marks its 10th anniversary this year, having made its public debut in 2012 and is so far the only monster truck with a battery-powered electric motor. It might remain so, according to monster truck driver Elliot Miller. Despite gasoline-powered cars still dominating U.S. roads, Detroit auto giants have unveiled more electric vehicles at the Detroit Auto Show, one of North America's largest, as they seek to wrest control of a growing market from Tesla and newer upstarts. Take a look.
So key messages here, things that are, we think, going to really excite people and get probably a lot more mainstream America thinking about electric propulsion systems, is a starting price at around $30,000. I mean, there's a lot of questions about not just our own production, our own sales volume, but just general EV adoption and general critical mass. Clearly, 24 will be a big year for us. We'll sell more and produce more in 24 than we do in 23. We'll produce and sell more in 25 than we do in 24. That's why we've made significant announcements and investments in cell capacity, battery plants, and manufacturing to make sure that we can meet the demand that we know is going to be forthcoming in the market.
We're still fairly early on the EV transition in the United States. Right now, we're about 5% market share of all new vehicles are sold are EV, so it's not a massive amount, but it is growing, and it's growing every month, which I think is a good thing. So I think that it's still going to be a long time before we hit that 100% mark, and obviously there's a lot that has to happen in that time in terms of product, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of pricing and incentives, tax credits, but we are headed in that direction.
At the Detroit Auto Show last week, President Joe Biden proclaimed that the Great American Road Trip is going to be fully electrified. After backing some 200,000 reservations for the Lightning, Ford has announced expansions to quadruple output over the next year, but automakers have been griping about a provision in the just-passed Inflation Reduction Act that sets strict sourcing requirements for federal EV subsidies. The requirement is meant to prod automakers into using EV batteries produced in North America, as well as critical materials sourced from North America or countries with which the U.S. has a free trade agreement. Automakers are hoping officials in Washington show flexibility in implementing the rule. And Bangkok's infamous number 8 route buses, or Pink Devils as locals call them, are often seen roaring down the busy streets in the Thai capital, furiously undertaking tuk-tuks, cars and motorbikes, narrowly avoiding collisions. Take a look.
คันคือมันต้องแข่งกันครับเล็กอย่างเรากินเปอร์เซ็นต์เนี่ยมันก็ต้องแข่งกันไปเพื่อเอารอบวันหนึ่งเราต้องวิ่งให้ได้4 รอบเงินมันถึงจะเหลือกินเหลือใช้ครับ
คือมีทุกสายเขาต้องแข่งกันทุกสายมันไม่มีใครที่จะวิ่งตามกันทั้งวันหรอกครับพี่ใช่ไหมอย่างพี่หากินออกไปหากินคือ1ต้องหาเงินเข้าบ้านไหมเงินคนละกระเป๋าพี่ได้เยอะผมไม่ได้พี่เลี้ยงผมไหมพี่ก็ไม่ได้เลี้ยงผมใช่ไหมครับก็คือเขาก็ต้องมีแข่งแต่เขาก็ไม่ได้แบบน่ากลัวอะไรปาดกันขนาดนั้น
ประสบอุบัติเหตุการรถสาย8 ครั้งนะครับตอนนั้นตอนเลิกงานตอนเช้าครับแล้วก็มือเนี้ยมันจะเกี่ยวกับข้างบนที่ราวที่จับรถบัสนะครับ
And Tesla's Elon Musk Friday showed off the latest version of a humanoid robot that the world's richest man said could one day eliminate poverty. Take a look.
Ultimately, millions of units, and it is expected to cost much less than a car.
I'll just bring it directly to the right here.
I would say probably less than $20,000 would be.
An Optimus prototype wheeled on stage during an annual Tesla AI Day presentation was mounted to a small platform. The robot, which remains a work in progress, waved to the audience and raised its knees. Tesla is adapting its autonomous car technology to give Optimus capabilities such as walking safely or working on a factory floor, company engineers said during the presentation. Tesla is designing Optimus robots to be produced at high rates, pushing the price perhaps lower than $20,000. Musk, who once warned of artificial intelligence being a threat to humanity, said that Tesla wants to make sure the transition to a society in which robots do the work and people reap the benefits is a safe one. He also said Tesla will begin testing Optimus on factory floors, doing simple tasks like carrying parts, and that the general public should be able to purchase the robots in 3 to 5 years. Images of a rainbow-like halo around the sun in the sky over Bolivian capital La Paz. Take a look. Now, this rare phenomenon occurs when light hits ice crystals in the clouds at the right angle. According to Los Tiempos report, the Green Ecology Portal said that it is a meteorological and optical phenomenon that is produced by the refraction of ice crystals that are suspended in the troposphere. And this generates a ring around the sun and with red, green and violet colors. It usually stays between 2 and 4 hours, depending on the weather conditions. It has no effects, however. It is recommended to use filters when looking at the sun, as it can have a negative effect on the view or even your eyes, dangerous for your eyes. For meteorologists, the halo is a starting point for the wet season and the end of the dry season. This is the second time a halo appeared in the Bolivian sky this month. Meanwhile, Foliage returned with the sounds of spring in the city of Canberra. Here's LeBron Fider from our Australian Bureau.
This year, Florida will celebrate its 35th year. Commonwealth Park here in Canberra, Australia, comes alive with color, beauty, and vibrance for 30 days. Florade, Australia's biggest celebration of spring, returns to Commonwealth Park after the COVID-19 pandemic. The month-long celebration started on September 17 until October 16, 2022. This year's theme, The Sound of Spring, will delight and surprise visitors with exciting music and performances set amongst a stunning display of over 1 million blooms. Florade is a flower entertainment festival held annually that features millions of flowering bulbs. Aside from the music, food, and entertainment, visitors will experience horticultural workshops, market traders, recreational activities, artistic displays, and a lot more. With free entry, Florida is the perfect place to enjoy the beauty of spring.
I think Canberra does an absolutely amazing job with all the preparation, all the planting, everything that's involved. I think it's great.
The Florida
first day, the first opening, where you can see different kinds of flowers, tulip and different colors of it. You can see yellow, purple, and pink. Come join us in celebrating and doing or seeing all the different kinds of flowers.
From Canberra, Australia, LeBron Feder, we live in extraordinary times.
A woman from flooded Florida rescues her 3 grandchildren with a kayak. Andrea Diaz quit her bartending job in Virginia, starts to rent her pet alpacas by the hour to cheer up Americans. Plus, researchers in Edinburgh have developed an AI helmet technology which aims to help firefighters rapidly map their surroundings and locate victims. That and more from our correspondent at large, Thomas I. Likeness.
And now news and commentary from around the globe. In the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, there are many stories to tell. Let me tell you about one hero. She's a grandmother, 67-year-old Susan Clark of Fort Myers.
I'm really stressed. It's been rough. My house flooded, her house flooded. I mean, we all flooded. So, yeah, these are my grandbabies. So,
this is what the neighborhood looked like. Her house flooded. Her daughter's house also flooded. There were 3 kids, her grandchildren, trapped in her daughter's home. Susan did what any grandmother would do. She drove over to where the youngsters were, and she dragged a kayak through the hip-deep floodwaters and brought the children to safety. One happy ending in a story that's been filled with tragedy and devastation. Artificial intelligence could help turn your neighborhood firefighter into a superhero. At least that's the hope of Chris Liu. He's a researcher in Edinburgh, Scotland. When they run into a building, Liu says this new helmet will help smoke eaters rapidly map their surroundings and find people trapped inside.
Yeah, firefighters are heroes. Everyone knows that, right? But what we are doing is not only they're already heroes, we also want them to have this superhero ability, see through smoke, see through darkness, and have this ability to find the effective solutions for the search and rescue.
The technology combines feeds from thermal cameras, radar, and inertial sensors. They're all mounted on a standard issue firefighting helmet. Field trials are underway. No word on when it might be available to your local fire hall.
So for now, we have all this proof of concept ready. What's next is find the right industry collaborators who is willing to work with us to make this technology really go to the market and benefit the global firefighters at a wide kind of audience. And Gaggle, as you said, how to visualize that with embedded display together with this kind of helmet front would be the first step we want to collaborate.
Other than any
dark smoke, having a thermal image capacity helps us massively in terms of the location of someone. We can scan a room a lot better. That could take sort of 5 to 10 seconds compared to probably a couple of minutes when we wouldn't have that technology.
In Bulgaria, they're asking the question, where have all the young people gone? Bulgaria has the dubious distinction of being one of the fastest shrinking nations in the world. This maternity ward is seeing fewer newborns. That's because fewer and fewer babies are being born. Young people are leaving Bulgaria in droves. Corruption, a lack of career prospects, and political instability are driving people away.
И това се дължи, че населението в Габрово вече не е в възраст, когато се раждат децата. Младите хора търсят работа и живот в големите градове и в някои случаи извън държавата.
In the last decade, Bulgaria has lost a tenth of its population. And what is left is an older demographic. A quarter of the population is aged 65 years or older. Rapidly, Bulgaria is becoming a nation of ghost towns. In my country, Canada, the receding ice in the Arctic is putting polar bears at risk and also people. Because the ice in the Hudson Bay melts earlier and comes in later, the bears spend more time on shore. And for people in the northern Manitoba town of Churchill, that presents a danger. It's not unusual for polar bears to wander into this town of 800 looking for food. Their favorite dining spot? The local dump. That's where they can be seen ripping open trash bags, foraging for food. Conservation officer Ian Van Ness says the town does take precautions. He says they even have a bear patrol.
Typically, we come here in the morning, we do a patrol first thing in the morning before school starts to ensure that the kids are going to be safe walking to school.
As an added precaution, people in Churchill don't lock their cars or homes. That's in case someone needs to find an urgent shelter after an encounter with a polar bear. Alpacas for rent, only $95 an hour in Arizona. Andrea Diaz has 14 of them. Her business is called My Pet Alpaca. She rents out 5 of these creatures. So Andrea, who would want to rent an alpaca?
So we do a lot of birthdays, we do a lot of weddings, we do a lot of restaurants and bars. It's all pretty fun. We do a lot of breweries too. But I think the best part is when we do kids' birthday parties, because you would think it's mostly for the kids. It's actually mostly for the adults. And it's really fun.
Diaz says, they make great pets.
Alpacas as pets are amazing. They're like a non-destructive cat. So they kind of mind their own business. They walk around the house, they munch on their hay, and that's pretty much it.
Incidentally, they are clean animals and can be trained to use a litter box. In Hollywood, getting a facelift is not unusual. And as a matter of fact, even landmarks get a nip and tuck once in a while. The patient this time is the famed Hollywood sign, one of the world's most iconic landmarks. It's coming up on 100 years old, and as it approaches the century mark next year, it needs a little cosmetic work. About 1,500 liters of paint will be applied to the letters to keep them looking young. Ferris Weeb, he's with the Hollywood Sign Trust, says, that sign was never meant to be permanent.
It started as a sign, as a marquee to promote land, hence the name Hollywood Land. And they were promoting homes in the Hollywood area. But the sign morphed into something else because that was the beginning of the movie industry and all this new technology. So the Hollywood sign morphed into the Hollywood that we see, which is the technology, the movie industry, the glamour. The
paint job should be completed by November 1st. I'll be back in 7 days, and in the meantime, I wish you all peace, joy, and happiness in the ensuing week. Thomas I. Likeness, correspondent at large, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
And finally, Unity Games is back in the UK 2 years since the pandemic. Here's Janelle Kasuga.
technology has taken over our modern world by storm. The internet has enabled us to communicate and stay in contact with people regardless of time and location. While it has its many advantages, it also has its downside. The digital age of smartphones have led more people to spend more time on social media than face-to-face conversation. In search of a more effective way to take a break from social media and spend more time with the family, here is how one community inspires to make a positive contribution.
The event started with the traditional parade of colours, a feature ceremony showcasing each area's colour coordinates. Active physical play is vital for our health and well-being and a great fun way to revive our social and interpersonal skills the old-fashioned way. Nothing like a friendly neighbourhood competition to uplift the community spirit. For the first time in 3 years, the Iglesia Cristo's annual Unity Games is making a comeback. The nature and purposes of these games are to promote and encourage teamwork and sportsmanship, as well as an opportunity for some friends and family bonding. This annual event is a well-anticipated gathering of communities from all over the United Kingdom. The coming together of participants from different regions of the United Kingdom, all ready to compete for the win.
More rewarding than winning is the social recognition we gain from events like these. This is Janelle Kasuga, London Bureau, United Kingdom. We live in extraordinary times.
Thanks, Janelle. As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.